What's up, guys? This is the Honest Outlaw here, and today we're going to be going over two of the best .380 pocket pistols on the market. The Glock 42 versus the Sig P238. Let's get started. The intended use of both these pistols is the same. They are small, lightweight, ultra carry guns. You can carry these in a pocket, you can carry them inside the waistband, and they almost disappear. The Glock 42 is a striker-fired polymer frame pistol like its bigger brothers. The Sig is a metal-framed, single-action pistol with a manual safety, whereas the Glock only has the trigger safety. If you were to ask me which one of these guns would be better for you, I would ask you, which type of gun have you shot before? Are you better with striker-fired polymer frame pistols, like your M&Ps and your XDs, your Glocks, things of that nature? I would suggest the Glock 42. Now, if you grew up shooting 1911s, you own a bunch of 1911s, I would gear you more towards the Sig P238. The reliability of both these guns has been very good, but I would have to give the slight edge to the Glock. I did several different types of malfunction tests that included throwing them in the dirt, snow, and things of that nature, and the Glock passed those a little bit better than the Sig due to the fact that the Sig has an external an external hammer, which had a tendency to get debris and snow and things like that in that you had to shake off before the pistol was functional. I did have some malfunctions in both of these pistols, which I can roll into the video. The durability of both these firearms is awesome, but I would have to give a slight edge to the Sig. On the unlikely circumstance that you were to drop your gun off a bridge or throw it out of a 10-story building, the Sig's metal frame would hold up a little bit better. The track record on both these guns is great as well. There's not a whole lot of firearms manufacturers that make better guns than Sig or Glock. The Glock has the advantage when it comes to price. It comes to market at about $375 to about $500, depending on where you find it. The Sig comes to market about $600 to $700. Now, one thing to consider when you're talking about buying either one of these firearms is the reasons why the Glock is cheaper. The Sig comes out of the box with factory-installed night sights, your 3-dot variety, and they are very good for a small frame pistol like this. Much better than you'll get on the Ruger LC 380 in the cars and things of that nature. When you buy your Glock and you open up the box, it's going to have polymer, standard Glock sights. And some people like those, some people don't. I installed the AmeriGlow night sights on my Glock pistol. They're very similar to the Trijicon HDs when it comes to the orange front, except they don't have the U rear sight, which I just don't really care for. So I went with these. They're also a little cheaper than the Trijicons, and I think they're the best sights that you can get for the Glock 42. I also spent another $20 and got a Ghost trigger bar upgrade for my Glock to give it a slightly better trigger. I think it took about a pound off the trigger when I put it in there. Didn't really get it down to 3 pounds like advertised, but they never do. The magazines for the Glock are a little bit cheaper. I think they're around 30 bucks a piece, whereas the Sig is about $40 to $50 a piece. Another thing to consider when it comes to price is that if you're looking for a .380 over a 9mm, you're going to find out that even though .380 ammo is smaller than 9mm, it actually is more expensive due to the fact that 9mm is much more common. The size and weight of these firearms is very similar. However, there are some minute differences. The Glock, for example, is longer at about 5.94 inches to the Sig's 5.5. It's about half an inch, roughly. Try to show that for you guys here. The Sig is also shorter when it comes to overall height. The Glock is 4.1 inches, whereas the Sig is 3.9. That's kind of an advantage for the Sig when it comes to pocket carry. The Glock is actually thinner than the Sig, even though it's bigger, which is a big advantage when it comes to inside the waistband carry. I think the Glock's 9.4 inches in thickness, and the Sig is 1.1. The barrel length on the Glock is 3.25 inches, whereas the Sig is 2.7. Now, due to its size, the Sig is actually a little bit easier to carry. However, the Glock is a little bit easier to draw and shoot, and you're really going to have to decide which one of those is more important to you. Now, the ergonomics of these pistols is where these guns really differ. As I said before, the Glock 42 is a striker-fired pistol with a trigger safety, and the Sig is a single-action pistol with a manual safety. Now, one advantage to the Sig as far as ergonomics that I found out compared to other 1911 pistols is that even if you have the hammer cocked back and you pop the safety on, you can still rack the slide. And that's a nice advantage compared to some of the other 1911 pistols that I've fired. Now, talking about the slide, again, do you see how easy that I rack the slide on this? It's a little more difficult than the Glock. It's got a little heavier spring. It's got a little heavier spring. But it's definitely doable. Now, striker-fired pistols versus single-action pistols, basically Glock versus 1911, is an argument that's been around for a long time. The advantages to the striker-fired system is that it has a consistent trigger pull, and once you rack the round in the chamber, it's ready to go. All you have to do is to depress the trigger, and it will fire. Some of the advantages to the 1911 design is that it's a little bit safer to carry, a little harder to have negligent discharges because of the manual safety. That can also be a con, however, because when you're drawing your firearm, you have to disengage the safety, and sometimes people forget to do that, and that can cost them their life. Both of these pistols are single stack 380s, and they have a 6 to 8 round magazine capacity depending on aftermarket accessories. Now, even though they carry the same amount of rounds, the Glock pistol's grip is actually a little bit bigger, which helps out as far as drawing the pistol and firing it quickly. The grip angles on these pistols are also very different. It's your standard Glock grip angle versus your standard 1911 grip angle. Now, the 1911 grip angle, I think, is 18 degrees off the square of the slide, whereas the Glock grip angle is 22 degrees off the square of the slide and has a hump here that it takes some getting used to, I have to admit. Both of these pistols are very smooth and snag-free. Most of the edges on these pistols have been rounded off. This is the SAS model. You can see on the slide there that those edges have been rounded off, which makes it a little easier to get it out, in and out of the pocket. I would have to give a little bit of an advantage to the Glock just based on the fact that it doesn't have the external controls. Now, the Glock does have a lower bore axis, and what that means is that it fits into your hand a little bit higher. The closer the slide is to your hand, the less perceived recoil that you're going to have. Now, if you look at the Sig here, for example, you can clearly see how much higher the slide goes over your hand than the Glock. Now, one of the problems with that is if you put your hand up too high, you can get what they call slide bite, where the slide comes back and hits your hand a little bit, although I haven't felt that to be a problem in the Glock 42. Now, even though these guns are small subcompact guns, there are a surprising amount of accessories available for both these pistols. And when my dog stops drinking water, I will tell you more about them. The Glock 42 does have a little bit of an advantage when it comes to accessories, based on the fact that since it's a Glock, most companies that make accessories for pistols do make accessories for the Glock 42. You can get any kind of sights you want. You can usually get trigger parts for this gun. You can get any kind of aftermarket accessories that you want. The Sig has a little bit of an advantage when it comes to the grip, however, because it does have removable grip panels that you can put on whatever type and kind and look of grip panel that you like. I know the Glock 42 takes a lot of heat about having a 6-round magazine capacity. However, for about $15 to $20 on eBay, you can buy a grip extension and put it on yourself. And that way, you can make the gun have a smaller profile with one magazine, and then when you need to, you can pop it out and have your extra 7. Now, I did add grip tape to both these firearms because I like my guns as grippy as possible. If grippy is a word, I'm not sure if it is, but if it isn't, it is now. Now, when you're talking about accuracy, both of these guns are inherently very accurate. You can hit targets with both of these guns up to 50 yards and even beyond. Even though these guns are very accurate, it's all about your ability to get the accuracy out of that pistol. Whether it feels good in your hand, whether you like the sights, whether the trigger is too light or too heavy, all these things you're going to have to take in consideration when you pick these pistols up. But for me, the Glock 42 is a more accurate pistol. I just can shoot it better. It's got less recoil, it's got a longer sight radius, it's got a lighter trigger. All those things for me contribute to more to more accuracy in this gun than this one. Most of your engagements with a pocket pistol is probably going to be from 0 to 7 yards. However, it is nice to have the ability to take a 25-yard, 50-yard shot if you need to. And both of these firearms will do that. Now, when I bought this firearm, I had heard some horror stories about the Glock 42 trigger being really bad. And I assumed that since the Sig P238 was a 1911 style firearm, it would have a very good trigger. But when I started shooting both the firearms, I found that not to be true. The Sig trigger is about 7.5 to 8.5 pounds, which I was going to show you on my Lyman trigger pull gauge, but I don't have any batteries for it, so you're just going to have to take my word for it. Whereas the Glock trigger on the website is slated to have a 5.5 pound trigger, which I think that to be pretty accurate. But I also added the Ghost 3-pound trigger bar, which improves the trigger even a little bit more. Alright, so let's get into the takedown of these firearms. Now, the Glock in itself has an advantage. It has the standard Glock takedown. If you look up any Glock video about how to take it down, they all work the same. You have the trigger depressed, pull the slide back just a little bit like that, pull the takedown bars down, slide comes right off, barrel and spring, everything's all right there. Then when you put it back together, just pop those things back in, put your slide back on, pull it back, and it's back to functioning. Doesn't get much easier than that. Now, the Sig is a little bit tougher, but it is not impossible. And maybe I can do this on camera, maybe I can't, we'll see. Basically, you pull the slide back to the rear. Now you see this little notch here where the slide stop is. You want to line that up, push the slide stop out from the other side with your finger, get a hold of this little guy, pull it out, set it down. Now your slide comes off like that. Same concept as your Glock. You have your recoil spring and then your barrel underneath. They come out all the same. However, where it differs is when you're putting this gun back on, your ejector here sticks up. So if you were to just ram your slide back like you did the Glock, you would break that off, have a lot of problems. So what you want to do is take your thumb, push underneath, and slide your slide back. Now we line up our little hole there to stick our slide stop through. Maybe we do. Barrel fell a little bit. Pull our slide all the way back. Stick our slide stop in. And the gun's put back together. A good thing about both these firearms is that the holster selection, each of these firearms, is very, very good. You can get any kind and type of holster you want for either of these guns. Some of the problems I had with the G42, I did have some malfunctions. I would say it's about 98% reliable. Magazine capacity is always an issue when you're talking about subcompact 380s. It's about 6 to 7 rounds. 380 is also a low-powered cartridge compared to your 9mm, your 40 Smith & Wesson. That's a disadvantage to both of these guns. Fucking dog. I didn't feel that the grip was, I don't know, for lack of a better word, grippy enough, so I had to put grip tape on it. That's kind of a disadvantage. The biggest disadvantage of the Glock 42 is the fact that it needs accessories to be as good as it is. I think it would be nice if it came with higher quality sights and a slightly better trigger. However, you're going to have to do those modifications yourself. And finally, I think it's harder to rack the slide on the G42 compared to the P238, which could be something to take into consideration if you're an elderly person or a smaller frame person. The Sig reliability rate is also about 98%. One of the cons that I had with it is that it's just a little too small for me, which is good for pocket carry, but it's just a little too difficult to shoot for me. The size also makes it harder to draw and manipulate the safety. The safety in itself for me is also a con. Just over the years, I've gone away from manual safeties on my carry guns. It's just a personal preference. The price on the Sig is also a con. It comes in well over $100 more than the Glock, sometimes $200 more, depending on where you buy it. Magazine cost is also another con I talked about earlier. Magazines themselves are about $20 more than the Glock. And the metal frame, in my opinion, is also a con. Even though this gun is smaller, it is actually heavier than the G42. Now if you put all these problems together, the heavier trigger, the smaller grip, the higher bore axis, you're going to find it's just a little harder to shoot than the G42. If I could only have one of these two guns, I would have to pick the G42. Most of concealed carry is just simply being comfortable with the firearm that you're carrying. I know for a fact that I can shoot the Glock 42 faster and more accurately than the Sig P238. I also know that it's easier to reload the Glock 42 than it is to load the Sig P238. A lot of it comes down to personal preference as well. I just simply like the ergonomics of the Glock 42 better. It's got lighter recoil, it's a lower bore axis, it's lighter and thinner, which makes it better for any type of carry. And finally, it doesn't have a manual safety to fumble around with, which makes it better for new or untrained shooters. This has been the Honest Outlaws review of the Glock 42 versus the Sig P238. And it's super cold out here, so I'm going to go inside. You guys have a nice day. Like and subscribe. Thanks. Please help out your local homeless shelters. And remember to recycle, because if you don't, my wife will find you. Since I forgot my magazines, I'm going to do a little New York reload.